Singapore fell on February 15, 1942, the worst disaster in British military history. Churchill called it a shameful defeat. Yet within the chaos of surrender, one Japanese officer's carelessness handed Britain something extraordinary: the complete tactical blueprint of how the impregnable fortress was conquered. The intelligence came too late to save Singapore, but what it revealed would reshape the entire Pacific War in ways Tokyo never imagined. 15th February 1942, 5:15 p.m. Fort Canning, Singapore. The air reeked of burning oil and cordite. General Arthur Percival signed the unconditional surrender at the Ford factory, handing 80,000 British, Australian and Indian troops into Japanese captivity, the largest surrender in British history. Outside, smoke from Keppel Harbour's destroyed warehouses blotted the equatorial sun into an angry orange disk. The temperature sat at 34 degrees Celsius. But inside military headquarters, the atmosphere felt Arctic. Singapore, the Gibraltar of the East, fortress that couldn't fall, had fallen in just 70 days. The strategic nightmare was absolute. Britain had poured $60 million into Singapore's defences over 2 decades. Massive 15-inch naval guns, concrete fortifications, enough ammunition to withstand a 6-month siege. The guns pointed seaward toward the expected naval assault. Lieutenant General Yamashita Tomoyuki came from the north instead, through impassable Malayan jungle, using bicycles, light tanks, and 30,000 men against 85,000 defenders. Military doctrine said it was impossible. The doctrine was wrong. The failure was systemic, catastrophic, inexplicable. How did numerically inferior Japanese forces achieve what every strategic assessment deemed impossible? British intelligence had underestimated Japanese capabilities catastrophically, dismissing them as short-sighted, incapable of night fighting, dependent on rigid tactics. Every assumption proved devastatingly wrong. Japanese troops moved through jungle with speed that baffled British commanders. Their air superiority was total. The RAF lost most aircraft in first-week raids. Yamashita's bluff, pretending he had vast reserves when ammunition ran critically low, worked perfectly because British command never tested it. In London, Churchill War Rooms, 10 Downing Street basement, 11:30 p.m. GMT. Captain Michael Thornbury, 43, Royal Intelligence Corps, Cambridge mathematics graduate, read the Singapore surrender cable with something beyond despair: professional horror. Thornbury had spent 3 years analyzing Japanese doctrine from intercepted communications, prisoner interrogations, reports from China. His assessments warned that Japanese tactical flexibility exceeded European expectations. His reports were filed, largely ignored, contradicted by senior officers who understood Asian warfare from Victorian colonial experience. Now 80,000 men were prisoners. Southeast Asia's resources, rubber, tin, oil, were in enemy hands, and Britain faced catastrophic momentum loss across the Pacific. India's eastern border was exposed. Australia faced direct threat. The dominoes were falling, and nobody understood how Yamashita had achieved the impossible so effortlessly. Thornbury's superior, Colonel James Whitmore, 56, career intelligence officer from Sandhurst, represented the establishment that had failed to see this coming. Whitmore still insisted Japanese success was numerical superiority and brutality, not tactical innovation. But Thornbury, reading field reports from survivors evacuated before surrender, saw patterns that contradicted every assumption: coordinated infantry armor tactics, effective close air support, rapid repositioning, psychological warfare through loudspeaker propaganda, surgical targeting of command infrastructure. The institutional response was predictable. Blame commanders on the ground, blame under-preparation, blame anything except fundamental misunderstanding of enemy capabilities. But Thornbury, working 18-hour days in his cramped war room's office, smelling the Blitz's lingering cordite when he emerged for rationed tea, knew the truth. Britain was fighting an enemy it didn't understand, using doctrine that didn't work. and losing catastrophically as consequence. The turning point came 4 days after surrender, 19th February 1942, 7:45 a.m. MI6 station in Colombo, Ceylon, Sri Lanka, received urgent communication from escaped British officer Major Richard Humphreys, Australian 8th Division, who'd evaded capture during Singapore's chaos. Humphreys brought something extraordinary, a complete Japanese operational document, seized from abandoned enemy position during final withdrawal. The document was remarkable for being overlooked, left in leather satchel when Japanese officer evacuated position during artillery barrage. The satchel reached London via military courier on February 27th. Thornbury, summoned to examine it, found himself holding something unprecedented. Operational Order 21, Malaya Campaign, Complete Tactical Assessment, written by staff officers under Lieutenant General Yamashita, including detailed after-action analysis, tactical innovations employed, logistical constraints faced, strategic deceptions executed. The document was in Japanese, requiring translation by Lieutenant Akira Tanaka, British-born son of Japanese diplomat who'd sided with Britain when war started. Tanaka, 28, worked in cramped office translating intercepts, facing constant suspicion despite impeccable loyalty. His translation revealed brutal truth. Japanese hadn't won through overwhelming force. They'd won through superior tactics, aggressive initiative, psychological warfare, and exploiting every British doctrinal weakness with surgical precision. Yamashita's plan depended on speed, surprise, and British inflexibility. Japanese forces moved at night, when British doctrine said defensive positions were secure. They infiltrated through impassable jungle because British defences focused on roads. They concentrated forces at unexpected points while British spread troops evenly. They attacked command posts while British protected front lines. They used bicycles for rapid infantry deployment, absurdly simple innovation that British never anticipated. When British retreated to prepared positions, Japanese bypassed them, cutting supply lines instead of costly frontal assault. The document detailed logistical crisis Japanese faced, ammunition shortages so severe that Yamashita couldn't sustain 3 more days of heavy fighting. If Percival had counterattacked on February 13th, Japanese offensive would have stalled. But Percival, seeing Japanese confidence, assumed they had vast reserves. Yamashita's bluff, radio deception, aggressive posture despite weakness worked perfectly because British commanders expected conventional warfare where force concentration telegraphed capability. Thornbury read through the night, cigarette after cigarette, tea growing cold. This wasn't just historical analysis, it was blueprint for how Japanese would fight across Pacific. Every assumption British military held was systematically proven wrong by the enemy's own assessment. The question that haunted him, could this knowledge change anything, or had Britain already lost too much momentum to recover? The answer would require convincing institutional establishment that everything they believed about this war was wrong. And that would be harder than any battlefield victory. March 1942, London. The war room's basement operated under maximum strain. Rationing was severe, 1.5 ounces of butter weekly, 1 egg, limited meat. Nightly bombing runs had decreased, but paranoia remained. Thornbury worked in office, lit by single bulb, 40 watts to save electricity, surrounded by translated excerpts from Yamashita's operational document. The heating barely functioned. March temperatures hovered around 6 degrees Celsius. Staff wore greatcoats indoors. Tea was made with leaves reused 3 times. This was Britain in 1942, exhausted, stretched, fighting on multiple fronts with dwindling resources. The institutional resistance was immediate and predictable. Thornbury's initial briefing to senior command, March 5th, met profound skepticism. General Sir Archibald Browning, 61, decorated veteran of First World War, dismissed the document's implications. We lost Singapore through under-preparation and poor leadership, Not because these tactics are revolutionary. Jungle fighting is inherently chaotic. Any force can succeed with surprise and brutality. Colonel Whitmore agreed. You must have got lucky. Their logistics were strained. You said so yourself. If we'd held 2 more days, they'd have collapsed. The establishment couldn't accept that fundamental doctrine was flawed. That would mean every current operation might be based on wrong assumptions. Easier to blame field commanders, bad luck, temporary setbacks. But Thornbury had allies. Wing Commander Jeffrey Peterson, RAF Intelligence 35, who'd lost his entire squadron over Singapore, recognized the truth. I watched our doctrine fail in real time. We positioned aircraft on airfields, thinking distance meant safety. Japanese struck at dawn with precision we thought they lacked. We assumed they couldn't coordinate air-ground operations. They did it perfectly. This document explains exactly how they're beating us. Captain Eleanor Hartley, 29, Signals Intelligence, Women's Royal Naval Service, worked intercept station reading Japanese military communications. Sharp-featured Cambridge linguistics graduate, she'd noticed patterns that matched Yamashita's document. Their radio discipline is exceptional. They use deception broadcasts, false traffic, silence when moving forces. Our intercepts miss half their movements because we're listening for communications patterns that match our doctrine, not theirs. Tanaka, the translator, faced worse treatment. Despite being British-born, loyal throughout, he endured constant suspicion. How do we know this translation is accurate? How do we know you're not Japanese agent? His father had been diplomat. That made him suspect despite having no contact with Japan since childhood. His younger brother served in British Army, currently missing in Burma. That didn't matter. Racial suspicion overrode everything. Thornbury defended him repeatedly, knowing Tanaka's expertise was irreplaceable. The challenge was organizational, not just analytical. British military doctrine evolved over centuries fighting European conventional warfare. Hold prepared positions, concentrate artillery, methodical advances. Japanese doctrine emerged from decades fighting Chinese irregular forces. Rapid maneuver, infiltration, psychological shock, bypassing strongpoints. The two approaches were fundamentally incompatible. British commanders trained at Sandhurst couldn't conceptualize warfare that violated every principle they'd learned. Thornbury and his small team, Peterson, Hartley, Tanaka, plus 2 junior analysts, worked to translate the document's insights into actionable intelligence. They operated from cramped office in War Room's sub-basement, working 16-hour days, sleeping on cots when bombing allowed, sustained by ration tea and determination that bordered on obsession. The atmosphere was claustrophobic. Concrete walls, artificial light, recycled air, constant awareness that tons of London earth separated them from sky. The technical challenges were immense. The document was partial, complete tactical assessment for Malaya, but operational plans for subsequent campaigns were referenced, not detailed. Thornbury's team had to extrapolate. If these tactics worked in Malaya, where would Japan apply them next? Burma was obvious. Similar jungle terrain. Dutch East Indies fell rapidly, using identical approach. The Philippines faced same pressure. But what about subsequent phases? Would Japanese adjust tactics if British adapted? How would they exploit new weaknesses? Statistical analysis became crucial. Lieutenant David Walsh, 26, statistician from London School of Economics, joined the team in mid-March. Walsh had been analyzing convoy losses. Thornbury recruited him to quantify Japanese tactical effectiveness. Walsh's findings were devastating. Japanese achieved objectives with 40% fewer casualties than equivalent British operations, moved at 3x expected speed through difficult terrain, sustained operational tempo for 28% longer before requiring resupply. The numbers proved Yamashita's approach wasn't luck. It was systematically superior execution against opponents following predictable doctrine. British defensive positions lasted average 18 hours when Japanese attacked. Doctrine said they should hold 72 hours minimum. British counterattacks succeeded only 12% of the time because Japanese anticipated them. Command posts were located and neutralized in average 6 hours because British positioned them according to manual, making them predictable. Environmental factors compounded difficulties. March 1942, Burma was collapsing using exact Malayan template. British forces under General Harold Alexander retreated toward India, fighting delaying actions that consistently failed. Thornbury's team sent urgent assessments. Enemy will infiltrate flanks, attack command elements, use speed to disrupt defensive preparations. Field commanders acknowledged receipt, then positioned forces exactly as doctrine specified. Defeat followed predictable pattern. Hartley's signals intelligence confirmed Japanese confidence. Intercepted communications showed commanders coordinating multi-axis attacks with precision, exploiting exact weaknesses Thornbury identified. "They know we're doctrinally inflexible," she reported, exhaustion evident in her voice. "They're exploiting it systematically." Tanaka worked translating supplementary materials, captured diaries, interrogation reports from Japanese prisoners, rare, tactical manuals. His linguistic expertise revealed nuances that transformed understanding. Japanese concept of keshi, determined death spirit, wasn't suicidal fanaticism, but calculated acceptance of risk to achieve tactical shock. Their night operations weren't reckless. They were carefully rehearsed. Their infiltration wasn't chaotic. It followed precise reconnaissance. Peterson coordinated with RAF intelligence, analyzing Japanese air operations. The document revealed their close air support doctrine. Aircraft coordinated directly with ground forces through radio communication, providing immediate response to tactical developments. British practice separated air and ground operations, requiring time-consuming approval chains. "We're fighting 20th century war with 19th century coordination," Peterson said bitterly. The personal toll was severe. Thornbury's marriage strained under constant absence. His wife Margaret managed household under rationing, enduring bombing alone, while he worked underground. Peterson's fiancée had been nurse in Singapore, now prisoner in Changi. Hartley's younger brother died at sea when his destroyer was sunk off Java. Tanaka faced daily prejudice despite impeccable service. Walsh developed stress-induced insomnia, working calculations through the night. Yet they persisted because alternative meant more disasters like Singapore. By late March, they'd assembled comprehensive assessment, Japanese tactical doctrine, operational patterns, likely future objectives, exploitable weaknesses. The document revealed Japanese logistics were genuinely strained. They depended on captured supplies. Their extended supply lines were vulnerable. Their rapid advances created overextension opportunities. But exploitation required British forces to adapt fundamentally, abandon rigid defensive positions, embrace maneuver warfare, coordinate air-ground operations, attack supply lines instead of frontline forces, use intelligence to anticipate rather than react. That meant retraining thousands of officers, rewriting doctrine, convincing institutional establishment that everything they believed was wrong. The chapter's final scene. April 1st, Thornbury's team presented complete assessment to combined chiefs of staff. The room was underground, war room's conference chamber, Spartan furniture, maps covering walls. Senior officers, veterans of First World War, colonial campaigns, traditional warfare, listened to comprehensive briefing explaining how their entire understanding of this conflict was flawed. The question hung unspoken. Would they accept revolutionary change, or would pride, institutional inertia, and doctrinal rigidity doom British forces to repeat Singapore's disaster across every Pacific theatre? April-July 1942. The assessment landed like unexploded ordnance in British military planning. Thornbury's team had documented not just tactics, but entire philosophy. Japanese operational art prioritized dislocation over destruction, tempo over position, psychological shock over material attrition. For officers trained in methodical European warfare, this wasn't military science. It was organized chaos that somehow kept winning. Tokyo, Imperial General Headquarters, May 1942. While Thornbury's team worked in London, Japanese command faced different problem: unexpected document loss. Colonel Masanobu Tsuji, Yamashita's chief planning officer, brilliant but arrogant, learned through intelligence channels that operational assessment had been captured. His reaction, recorded in subordinate's diary, later recovered, was dismissive. Even if British possess our documents, their doctrinal rigidity prevents adaptation. They will study our methods as historical curiosity while we conquer their empire. Tsuji's confidence was rational, even justified. Japanese forces had achieved unbroken victories for 6 months. Singapore, Philippines, Hong Kong, Dutch East Indies, Burma, all fallen using identical approach. British, American, Dutch defenders all fought conventionally, all lost predictably. Why would Britain suddenly change doctrine that had governed military operations for generations? Institutional momentum alone would prevent radical adaptation. But Tsuji underestimated one factor: British desperation. By June 1942, Britain faced existential crisis. Mediterranean threatened, Atlantic convoys under submarine assault, Soviet Union barely surviving German onslaught, Pacific Empire collapsing. No room remained for institutional pride, only brutal pragmatism. Survival demanded adaptation, even if that meant abandoning century-old doctrine. The change began not in London but in India, where General William Slim, 51, took command of shattered forces retreating from Burma. Slim was unusual. Middle-class background, commissioned from ranks, proven combat leader who valued results over procedure. He read Thornbury's assessment during June monsoon rains at headquarters in Barrackpore, while exhausted troops recovered from longest retreat in British military history, 1,000 miles from Rangoon to Indian border. Slim's response was immediate: "This explains everything we experienced. Now how do we counter it?" He summoned staff officers. "Doctrine that lost Singapore and Burma won't recapture them. We're retraining this entire army using enemy's assessment of our weaknesses as blueprint for what to fix." What followed was unprecedented military transformation under operational pressure. Slim established jungle warfare schools throughout India, using Yamashita's document to teach officers what not to do. British defensive positions became mobile, dispersed, mutually supporting but not linear. Command posts relocated frequently using random patterns, not manual specifications. Patrols operated aggressively at night instead of defensively. Air-ground coordination was reformed, with direct communication replacing bureaucratic approval chains. The innovation extended to logistics, area Yamashita's assessment identified as Japanese weakness. Slim's forces, supplied by airdrops, could operate without vulnerable road-bound supply lines. British quartermasters, traditionally cautious, embraced radical approach: pre-positioned supply dumps, redundant distribution networks, air resupply for isolated units. This negated Japanese tactic of bypassing strongpoints and cutting supply routes. Isolated British units could now sustain defensive positions indefinitely. Signals intelligence, Hartley's domain, proved transformative. Japanese radio communications followed predictable patterns because they assumed technical superiority meant security. British intercept stations, now understanding enemy doctrine, could predict operational moves from communications analysis. Radio silence indicated movement preparation. Increase in traffic signaled attack coordination. Specific unit identifiers revealed force concentration. By July 1942, Japanese intelligence began noticing anomalies. British patrols behaved differently. Aggressive reconnaissance instead of passive defense, night operations instead of withdrawal to positions, immediate response to Japanese movements instead of delayed reaction. Intercepted Japanese communications showed confusion. Enemy demonstrates uncharacteristic tactical flexibility. British positions located per doctrine found abandoned. Expected defensive response. Encountered counterattack against supply elements. The first successful test came during Arakan Campaign, October 1942, May 1943. Japanese 55th Division attacked using proven Malaya-Burma approach, infiltrate through jungle, bypass defensive positions, attack command posts, exploit enemy predictability. But British 14th Indian Division, trained by Slim, didn't respond predictably. When Japanese infiltrated, British remained in fortified positions supplied by air, while mobile columns counterattacked Japanese supply lines. When Japanese attempted encirclement, British forces withdrew and reformed in unexpected positions, guided by intelligence intercepts that predicted enemy movements. The campaign was tactical draw. Neither side achieved decisive victory, but strategic transformation. Japanese, for first time since Pearl Harbor, failed to achieve objectives through proven tactics. Casualty ratios, previously favoring Japan 3-1, equalized. Operation Tempo, previously controlled by Japanese initiative, became contested. Most significantly, Japanese commanders expressed doubt. Their operational method, invincible for 8 months, was being effectively countered. Lieutenant General Renya Mutaguchi, commander Japanese 15th Army, intelligent but conventional officer, faced perplexing situation. His forces employed tactics that had conquered Southeast Asia, yet British responded as if reading Japanese playbook. Mutaguchi's March 1943 assessment to Tokyo revealed confusion. Enemy demonstrates foreknowledge of our tactical approaches. Possible intelligence compromise requires investigation. Tokyo's response illustrated institutional arrogance that mirrored British pre-Singapore. British cannot comprehend superior Japanese tactics. Temporary setbacks result from operational factors, not enemy adaptation. Continue proven approach. The Imperial General Headquarters, confident from unbroken victories, couldn't accept that enemy might genuinely learn and adapt. This was identical error Britain made before Singapore, assuming enemy incapability based on racial prejudice rather than operational evidence. In London, Thornbury's team tracked the transformation through intelligence reports. Peterson noted air combat improvements. RAF fighters now engaged Japanese aircraft using tactics that countered enemy advantages. Diving attacks exploiting weight, avoiding dogfights where Japanese maneuverability dominated. Hartley documented signals intelligence successes. British intercepts were predicting Japanese operations with 70% accuracy. Walsh's statistical analysis showed British casualty rates declining, operational effectiveness increasing. The captured document's impact extended beyond tactical adaptation. Strategic planning incorporated understanding of Japanese logistics vulnerabilities, extended supply lines, dependence on captured resources, limited merchant shipping, industrial capacity strained by multi-front war. British planners realized that Japanese couldn't sustain unlimited expansion. Their victories created overextension that clever strategy could exploit. By mid-1943, pattern was undeniable. Japanese tactical excellence remained formidable, but they were fighting opponents who understood their methods and developed counters. Burma front stabilized. Papua New Guinea campaigns showed Japanese advances stalling against Australian and American forces, employing similar adaptive tactics. Solomon Islands fighting demonstrated that Japanese weren't invincible in jungle warfare when opponents abandoned conventional doctrine. The perplexity in Tokyo grew. How were Allied forces, supposedly doctrinally inferior, consistently anticipating Japanese operations? Security investigations found nothing conclusive. The Singapore document loss was known, but Imperial headquarters dismissed its significance because Western forces couldn't comprehend Japanese warrior spirit. This cultural arrogance blinded them to operational reality. Enemies who study defeat learn, while victors who ignore warnings stagnate. The chapter culminated with bittersweet irony. Intelligence that came too late to save Singapore arrived exactly when needed to transform British Pacific warfare. Yamashita's assessment, written to document Japanese tactical brilliance, became their opponent's textbook for defeating those exact tactics. The officer who carelessly left the document in abandoned position inadvertently changed the war's trajectory, not through immediate tactical impact, but through enabling fundamental strategic adaptation. Colonel Tsuji, learning in July 1943 that British forces were explicitly training against Japanese doctrine using captured documents, finally grasped the magnitude. We gave them complete understanding of our operational art. They've had 18 months to adapt while we remained static, confident in proven superiority. We face enemies who know us better than we know ourselves. But by then, transformation was complete, momentum shifting, and time for Japanese strategic correction was running out. August 1945. The war ended not with Japanese defeat in single climactic battle, but through systematic collapse across Pacific and Asian theaters. The final calculations were sobering. 5 million Japanese military casualties, empire reduced to home islands, industrial capacity destroyed, 2 atomic weapons demonstrating technological inferiority. Britain's losses were horrific, military casualties exceeding 380,000, civilian bombing deaths over 67,000, financial exhaustion requiring American loans for survival. Victory came at cost that devastated both victor and vanquished. Yet within catastrophe, specific legacy emerged from that carelessly abandoned document. The tactical and strategic transformation it enabled, particularly in Burma, saved thousands of Allied lives and accelerated Japanese defeat in Southeast Asia. General Slim's 14th Army, trained explicitly using Yamashita's assessment to understand enemy doctrine, executed longest successful offensive in British military history, 1944-45 reconquest of Burma. The campaign's casualty ratio, previously favoring Japanese, reversed dramatically. British forces, now doctrinally adapted, inflicted 185,000 Japanese casualties while sustaining 71,000 themselves. The statistical vindication was comprehensive. Walsh, now Major, compiled final assessment in autumn 1945. Forces trained using captured documents insights achieved 43% higher operational effectiveness than conventionally trained units. Casualty rates for adapted forces were 37% lower in comparable engagements. Time to achieve operational objectives decreased by average 28%. Intelligence-driven operations based on understanding Japanese doctrine succeeded 73% versus 31% for conventional operations. The human cost of Singapore's original disaster remained. 80,000 prisoners endured 3.5 years brutal captivity. 12,000 died building Burma-Siam Railway alone. For survivors, liberation in September 1945 was relief mixed with trauma. Major Richard Humphreys, who'd escaped with the document, survived prisoner of war camps and testified, "Learning that document I carried helped train forces that eventually defeated Japan provides small solace. But knowing something positive emerged from catastrophe matters when processing such horror. The officer who'd abandoned the document was never definitively identified. Post-war investigation suggested it was Captain Shigeharu Asada, staff officer under Yamashita, who evacuated forward observation post during British artillery barrage on February 14, 1942. Asada survived the war, returned to Japan, never publicly acknowledged the loss. His personal diary, discovered decades later, contained February 14th entry, "Retreated under heavy fire, retrieved critical equipment." The document apparently didn't qualify as critical, catastrophic misjudgment. Thornbury, promoted colonel, continued intelligence work through war's end. His expertise in Japanese doctrine made him crucial analyst for Pacific operations through 1945. After victory, he was assigned to post-war assessment team examining captured Japanese archives. In Tokyo, October 1945, he read Imperial General Headquarters records that confirmed what he'd suspected. Japanese command knew about document capture, dismissed its significance due to cultural arrogance. Tsuji's 1943 assessment, accurately predicting Allied adaptation, was filed and ignored by superiors confident in racial superiority over Western forces. The irony was profound. Both sides initially suffered from identical failure, underestimating enemies based on prejudice rather than evidence. Britain paid catastrophically at Singapore. Japan paid catastrophically empire-wide. The difference was adaptation speed. Britain, facing existential crisis, adapted within 18 months. Japan, riding victory momentum, maintained doctrinal rigidity until defeat was inevitable. Eleanor Hartley, now commander, led Signals Intelligence Unit through war's end. Her intercept teams tracked Japanese communications through final collapse, reading desperation in increasingly disorganized traffic. Post-war, she joined government communications headquarters, applying Pacific War lessons to emerging Cold War intelligence challenges. Her contribution to breaking Japanese naval codes, using doctrinal understanding from captured assessment to contextualize encrypted messages, was officially recognized only when documents were declassified in 1990s. Wing Commander Peterson survived the war, though his fiancée didn't. She died of disease in Changi Prison, 1944. He never fully recovered from that loss. Post-war, Peterson taught at RAF Staff College, where his lectures on adaptive doctrine became required curriculum. He emphasized lesson from captured document. Never assume you fully understand your enemy. Never let pride prevent learning from defeat. Never believe superiority is permanent. Lieutenant Tanaka, the translator whose linguistic expertise was fundamental, faced post-war complexity. Despite exemplary wartime service, racial suspicion lingered. He emigrated to Canada in 1948, becoming university professor teaching Japanese language and culture. His contribution to British intelligence remained classified until 1970s. Official recognition came decades too late to counter discrimination he'd endured. His personal reflection, written in 1950s, "I helped Britain understand enemy I shared ethnicity with. Neither side fully trusted me. War makes everyone's loyalty suspect." General Slim, promoted Field Marshal, became Governor-General of Australia and later Chief of Imperial General Staff. His memoir, Defeat into Victory, credited multiple factors for Burma's success, but specifically acknowledged captured Japanese assessment provided unprecedented insight into enemy doctrine. Understanding opponents' operational philosophy transformed our entire approach. Slim's transformation of 14th Army, dismissed as forgotten army while fighting continued, became model for doctrinal adaptation under operational pressure. The strategic lessons reverberated beyond immediate conflict. British military education post-war emphasized flexibility over rigid doctrine, intelligence-driven operations over assumption-based planning, willingness to learn from defeat over institutional pride. The Singapore disaster and subsequent adaptation using captured document became case study taught at Sandhurst. Catastrophic failure can yield transformative success if lessons are genuinely learned rather than rationalized away. For Japan, parallel lesson took longer to absorb. Post-war self-defense forces, rebuilt under American guidance, studied Pacific War to understand how doctrine that dominated 1941-42 became obsolete by 1944-45. The captured assessment became historical artifact, illustrating how operational security failure, combined with enemy adaptability, created strategic vulnerability. Modern Japanese military education uses the document to teach. Operational success breeds complacency. Enemies learn while victors stagnate. Tactical excellence without strategic adaptation guarantees eventual defeat. The document itself, originally classified top secret by both Japan and Britain, was gradually declassified, portions in 1960s, complete version in 1990s. Historians gained access to primary source explaining Japanese tactical dominance and British adaptation. Academic analysis confirmed Thornbury's wartime assessment. Document was genuinely comprehensive operational guide that, had it remained secret, might have prolonged Japanese tactical advantages significantly. The final irony resonates through decades. Intelligence that arrived too late to stop them, arrived precisely when needed to reverse them. Singapore fell, but understanding why Singapore fell enabled victories that eventually ended the war. One officer's carelessness in February 1942, leaving leather satchel in abandoned position during artillery barrage, inadvertently changed Pacific War's trajectory by handing opponents complete understanding of what made Japanese tactics effective. Captain Thornbury's team, working exhausted in underground rooms, sustained by weak tea and determination, facing institutional skepticism while empire collapsed around them, transformed catastrophic intelligence failure into strategic advantage through intellectual rigor, adaptability, and refusal to accept defeat as inevitable. Their legacy wasn't glorious victory in single battle, but unglamorous, crucial work of understanding enemy well enough to counter advantages that seemed overwhelming. The plaque installed in Imperial War Museum in 1995, commemorating intelligence operations during Pacific War, includes modest inscription: "They learned from disaster what pride prevented learning from victory." Their adaptation under pressure demonstrated that wars are won not only by force, but by willingness to change when change means survival. The officer who abandoned that document never knew his carelessness helped defeat his nation. The officers who recovered it never received public recognition during their lifetimes. History remembers dramatic battles, heroic charges, decisive moments. But sometimes, war's true turning points happen in cramped underground offices where exhausted analysts study enemy documents by dim light, drinking recycled tea, quietly transforming understanding that changes everything, without drama, without glory, without immediate recognition, but with ultimate impact that saves thousands of lives and shapes final outcome. That was Singapore Document's true legacy, not dramatic revelation, but patient professional intelligence work that proved disasters can be transformed into advantages when intellectual honesty overcomes institutional pride, and when willingness to learn exceeds determination to rationalize defeat. If this story of extraordinary intelligence work that changed the Pacific War's course fascinated you, please subscribe to our channel for more untold stories from Britain's finest hour. What other overlooked moments from the Second World War should we explore? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your suggestions help us uncover history's hidden turning points. Hit that notification bell so you never miss these remarkable tales of courage, adaptation, and the quiet brilliance that won the war. Thank you for watching, and remember, history's greatest victories often begin with learning from defeat.